The next key speaker, he is, I now have to see to get this right. He is a lecturer in youth knowledge in the University of Southeast Norway. He is the president of Medvirkningsagentene, which is the participation agency. And he also is the former Secretary General of Ungdom Fritid, which is a national association of youth centers. He is founding member of POIVE, Professional Open Youth Work in Europe. He's a band member, as you maybe saw. He's a festival organizer, he's a seminar organizer, and he's a proud owner of 2 cats. Here are Pål Isdahl Solberg.
Thank you, Tone, for that amazing introduction. So my name is Pål Isdahl Solberg. I work, as Tone said, at the University of Southeast Norway. I'm going to talk about how youth workers can prepare and deal with risk. So my background is quite well described by Tone. It's basically, I worked as a youth worker and been involved with youth NGOs. I started at the youth center when I was 9. And I've been active all my life in different youth NGOs. Now I'm not a youth anymore, but I've still kept an interest in this field of youth, and I'm working quite a lot with it. And now also at the university where I lecture in youth knowledge. I spent a good part of 6 years as a Secretary General of the National Association of Youth Centers in Norway, which is quite a large organization in Norwegian standards. We have around 600, 700 youth centers and about 120,000 young people attending those youth centers. And I've been involved in kind of local youth work here still with theater groups and on a national and international level. So my background is quite varied, but I'm very happy to always kind of keep in touch with my actual youth work, like going with young people and doing stuff, which is what I spend about 50% of my time doing. I want to talk a little bit about risk management and youth work. And for me, it's connected with different aspects of youth work. I think one of the challenges we have with youth work is this idea of youth workers being this kind of Swiss Army knife, one tool to fix everything, you know? If it's drug habits or radicalization or mental health or suicide issues. We call upon youth work to deal with all these kind of issues, and we do so in Norway and in many other countries with maybe not enough training of youth workers. And it takes a lot of skills and knowledge to deal with these kind of complicated situations. And understanding kind of the role of the youth worker, what are our role in society and what are our role in connection with other institutions around us, is quite important for me. And this Swiss Army knife syndrome or Superman syndrome or whatever you call it, something that's been bugging me a lot with youth workers. How can we prepare for all these kind of different scenarios that we're going to deal with? And what kind of scenarios where are our limitations? How do we safeguard ourselves in these situations? There is a reason why youth work works really well with dealing with a large different kind of array of situations and why it works really well as a Swiss Army knife. You can use this tool to fix a lot of small situations in life, and that's related to prevention work. There's a meta study done in Norway by Shanke looking at what are the characteristics of the methodologies that work when it comes to prevention work. And I find this quite interesting. They say that if you're going to have youth work or any kind of prevention work, if it's drugs, alcohol, violence, it needs to take place and be organized within the youth's normal hangouts and learning environment, which we very often have in youth work. We have a place to gather, we're in a youth center or in an NGO. So it's important not to create specific arenas for prevention work. It needs to happen where young people already are, which is something that youth work very often has control over. And the action needs to be holistic, they say. they need to look at all aspects of a young person's life. They need to look at school, youth work, sports, friends. So it needs to be a holistic approach. And also for youth workers, this is important because we also need to understand that our work has some limitations. We do not have access to these young people 24 hours a day. They spend most of their time outside of youth work. They spend most of their time in school. They spend most of their time with family. So we need to see ourselves in this holistic view. They also say that the actions need to be designed and adapted to the target groups, which means that one approach doesn't fit all. You need to kind of be able to improvise, know the people you work with, know what works with them. And this is, of course, the strength of non-formal learning, is that we are able to adapt, we're able to improvise. We're able to see the situation and change methodology, change subjects really easily, because the learning needs of the young people is not coming from us, which is what usually happens in school, you know, when teachers are saying, we're going to teach you this. With youth work, very often we say, let us experience what you are interested in, and we will follow up on your interests. So this adapting to young people is quite important for good prevention work. And that action needs to be founded in strategies and plans. So it's important that we are connected to everybody else also. It's not only our effort that needs to be done, it's the school needs to be involved, parents needs to be involved. So it needs to be kind of this meta level, that there's an overall plan. And good prevention work should also work on a long-term perspective. It's what happens before something goes wrong. It's years and years of good work. Not if something goes wrong, but if something doesn't go wrong. And this is the problem with prevention work. It's how do you prove that our work with this 13-year-old made him not do drugs when he was 17? The measure should be implemented as early in life as possible, which means that early intervention is working best. So the earlier we meet young people and are able to interact or intervene with them, the more impact it will have. And also to actually implement these things before you observe problem or antisocial behavior. So it means that it's the prevention work that you do in your daily work as youth workers that are important. And it needs to be a continuity. We can't say now we have a problem with young people in the streets. We need to work on this all the time, which is hard for politicians to see, that we're funding youth work because we are going to avoid problems in 2, 3, 4, or 5 years, and we don't have any problems now. So it's hard to see the effect of good prevention work. And also they say that active participation in the target group is important. We need to have interacting learning experiences with them. It needs to be a resource-based approach, meaning that we see young people as resources. And it needs to be kind of designed for the young people. And I think youth work is in a really good position to do good preventive work, looking at what makes preventive work well. So this is why I think youth work is working as well as this kind of Swiss Army knife. We can deal with a lot of situations. The environment and the way we work is really well suited for preventing issues to happen. But it has some kind of quality criteria that we need to follow. That being said, situations do happen and we need to prepare for them. And I'm going to talk about risk assessment and why it matters to me. So risk assessment is basically looking at preparing for stuff that could happen. I usually do this by looking at frequency, consequences, and how I can do actions to lower or handle risk. I work both in youth work, but also with a lot of big festivals, like for everything from 500 to 11,000 people. And then, of course, we need to think through really well all the stuff that could happen. And I've taken this kind of learning into my youth work also. But it was not actually from the festivals I learned it. I learned it from myself. And there was 2 situations, I think, that really defines how I think about risk and why I think about risk. The first one was basically a situation that went well from a risk management perspective. The other one didn't really work out that well. The first situation that happened to me, it was a young girl who called me, And she said that she has been subject of sexual abuse. And it was not from her parents, but it was from a youth worker. Not connected to our organization, luckily. But I was not prepared for that call. I was not prepared for how to meet that young person, what to say. I was perplexed. I told her that, you know what, I have to find out how I'm going to deal with this. I spent time researching. Luckily, I had resources around me. I could call people, but I kind of had to create a response. My organization and myself, I was not prepared to, what kind of people do I need to help to make sure that she gets the help she wants? How do I safeguard myself from a legal perspective? How do I deal with these kind of thoughts myself? And I spent 24 hours figuring out what to do before I came back and were able to deal with this situation in a matter and a way that was responsible. And after that, that situation shook me up really bad. I'm not sure if I may even have made the situation worse for her. So this is one of the situations that has really formed me and my way of thinking about risk. The other one happened a couple of years later. I think you know, here in Norway, we had a horrible incident a couple of years ago where Anders Behring Breivik killed a large amount of young people at Utøya, on a small island not far from here. At that point, I had been working at Utøya for almost 10 years, doing summer camps. I was on my way from the west coast of Norway to the east coast of Norway to go to work there. We lost colleagues, good friends, and we lost young people from our organization. That seems like a horrible situation to be in, and of course it was. These are both horrific incidents. But this time we were actually prepared. The organizations, we have done a lot of risk assessment. We hadn't prepared for this exact situation, but we had prepared for what happens if something goes really, 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 really bad. Who do I contact? Who do I call? My staff, we had 10 staff. They were working also close to where the bombs went off. They knew that everybody were to check in with me before and check that everybody was okay. Then we checked the next level of people. Are everybody okay? And at some point, of course, we realized that we had lost young people in our organization. They were shot and killed. And we had some kind of response prepared, not for this exact situation, but for what we would say a serious situation. So from this very personal meeting with this young girl, where I was unprepared, to this meeting with a huge kind of almost natural disaster, which I was not prepared for that situation, but we were prepared for something like that to happen. The response was totally different, and the way we could safeguard ourselves and the people around us was totally different. So this is why risk is an important factor for me. So when I think about risk, I talk about frequency. How often do things happen? What are the consequences of those things? And how can we either prevent it or at least handle what's happened? So let's take, for instance, an earthquake in Norway. It's very unlikely to happen, maybe every 70 years. But the consequences could be quite bad, which means that we need to have some kind of emergency plan. And what can we do to lower the risk? We can build good structures. We can have some kind of pamphlet saying how you deal with earthquakes. And then you have these small things that happen all the time, like you get a cut on your finger. It's going to happen like, if you take 1,000 people, it's going to happen probably like 100 times a day. Maybe not that much, but the consequences are really small. It's not really, it heals in a couple of days. So you can do some low risk management, like you can have bandage ready. And this happens all the time, in youth centers. Breaking a leg happens all the time. In a festival of 11,000, we expect to have somewhere between 3 and 7 legs break during one festival, a festival weekend. So per 1,000 people, we expect to have 1.5 leg breaking off. I've done 10, 15 festivals, it's pretty accurate. So you're going to experience as a youth worker that somebody breaks its leg. The consequences, it hurts, it's bad, it can be really harmful, but you can deal with it. You know, you can go to the hospital, you can do whatever you need to deal with the situation. It's not lethal. But you do actions to lower the risk. You take away thresholds that you could fall over, or you think about the risk about these things. So we're using a risk assessment form. I know the text is really small, and we're going to send everything to you after, and also an Excel sheet where you can do this risk assessment yourself. But I look first at the hazard, the threat, let's say minor injuries. Okay, it's going to happen quite a lot. There's a cause, maybe we have knives laying around, we have some glass that's broken. The probability of this happening is quite high. The consequences is quite low. And I sum up these two numbers, and I know when do I have to take immediate action. If there's something really serious, like bullying, it happens a lot, and the consequences can be really bad. That means that I need to take immediate action if I meet the situation where bullying is occurring. So this kind of risk assessment, how often does it happen? What are the consequences, and how can we deal with it? And the higher the score or the consequences plus the frequency, the higher level of preparedness you need to have. So we will share this resource with you, so it's possible for you also to do a risk assessment. And for me, it's like we have to think about what's the worst thing that could happen. Like with Utøya, that we actually were able to deal with somehow. We had prepared for situations where young people could sit on a bus, maybe with half our organization involved, and they could drive off a cliff. If I'm gone as the manager of the organization, who do you contact? Who's in charge? We had thought about these things because we took the worst case scenario in mind. So you plan for small and big events, terrorism, breaking legs, and you just think to the consequences. If you do this enough, you get very used to thinking risk management, and you get very used to defining what could go wrong in this situation. So this is a tool I use a lot when working with organizations, festivals, and especially in youth work, where we have a lot of small incidents very often. As a follow-up from that, we also learned that some situations occurs more often, and our response is very often not very prepared. So we have started making what we call warning and response sheets. So for some situations that occur a lot with young people, what should we look for, and how should we deal with it as youth workers? Very often youth workers are the first response. We know that the trust level between youth workers and adults, for instance, or youngsters, are very high. They trust youth workers more than teachers, less than friends, but still they're an important and significant person in the young people's life if they're involved in youth work. So we made this kind of warning and response sheet saying, what do we look for and how do we respond to it? And we're developing more and more of these, and we will share them with you also. I'll show you some examples. For instance, here, it's a lot of text, we'll send it out. What do I look for when it comes to bullying, warning signs of bullying? So we have some signs that a child could be bullied. If a child comes home with unexplained injuries, black marks, small scrubs, that could be, don't have to be, but it could be one sign of a kid being bullied. If they're losing clothes, books, jewelry, valuable stuff all the time, maybe somebody's taking it from them. They might have some psychosomatic issues. They can have stomach ache, headache, stress-related pains. They could change their eating habits, like suddenly skipping meals or binge eating, or they come back from school hungry because somebody took their lunch, for instance. Now, like one of these things alone is not necessarily a sign that a kid is being bullied, but if you see multiple of these signs, that's when you as a youth worker should react and say, wait a minute, something's happening here that I need to investigate more. I need to look closer into this. If they have difficulty sleeping, experiencing nightmares frequently, for instance, their grades in school go down. They lose interest in schoolwork, or they lose interest in the area where they're most likely bullied. They don't want to go there. They try to avoid that situation. They might feel helplessness, like I'm alone in the world, or a lowered self-esteem. And they might also start with more self-destructive behavior, like running away from home, harming themselves, or maybe even talking about suicide. And there's a close link between suicide and bullying, and we'll come back to that also. You can also look for warning signs that a child is bullying another, being a bully. So if somebody is very often getting into physical or verbal fights, they have friends who bully others, they say, okay, it's not me, it's my friends who's bullying. I'm not a bully. We can sometimes see an increase in level of aggressiveness of young people that are bullies. We see that they might get sent a lot to the principal's office or get detention in school, they're misbehaving in school. Maybe they have some extra money or extra belongings they didn't have before, whether they get them. Very often also people who are bullying others, they blame others for their problems. It's not my fault, it's his or hers or schools or parents. So they're not taking responsibility for their actions, they're blaming others. And they are sometimes very competitive about their reputation or their popularity. So again, one sign alone is not necessarily every people misbehave sometimes, but if you see a cluster of these signs, I think you as a youth worker or as a parent should kind of at least try to understand more what's happening. So these are the warning sign part. We make this for different situations, suicide, radicalization, and then we try to form also some responses. So as a response to bullying, pay attention. As a youth worker, you have a responsibility to pay attention to the young people's environment. And you know this, if you worked with youth work for a while, you go into a room and you can feel that something just happened. Everything looks normal, but your kind of tacit knowledge tells you that there's something here that's a little bit off. So this is the kind of things that you pay attention to. You have eyes open and big eyes, big ears, and large heart. If you experience a bullying situation, you intervene. You take action immediately if people are bullied. You remove them from danger, making sure that you safeguard yourself, of course. But if somebody's being beaten up, you take that person away from that situation or you remove the threat. But at least you intervene and break up the situation. And you have to report it to relevant colleagues, maybe other institutions, parents, school, other people that needs to be involved. Again, looking at this, why does youth work? It's this holistic approach that we talk to a lot of institutions, we talk to a lot of different stakeholders in the situation and are being a part of this holistic approach. And then you investigate. What has happened here? Get the full story. Talk to both sides, why did this happen? You be an active listener, and as a youth worker, maybe you also have some conversational techniques that you can use to talk to young people, to investigate what did really happen, what was the consequences, who initiated it, what was the history before. And then you implement actions to prevent bullying taking place or prevent bullying continuing. And you have to coordinate these actions with parents, schools, and other institutions. It's also important that you keep records in a safe way, also making sure that private information is kept in a private way. But you document what you do and make sure that there's a record of your actions and other actions. So this is kind of how we design it. We do warning sheets, what to look for, and then how do we respond to it. We have other warning sheets. We have for mental crisis. And this is one hard one, I think, in this seminar is about mental health. One thing is, like, everybody's depressed. Everybody's feeling sad sometime. Everybody, life sucks sometimes. Your boyfriend breaks up with you. You can lose somebody in your family. And we have to deal with this at youth workers, being counselors, being significant others, being there for them to talk to. But when it comes into mental crisis, where we're talking about situations that would need professional support, we can recognize this in a different way. For instance, people that are suffering a mental health crisis, they're unable to do everyday tasks. getting dressed, brushing their teeth, washing themselves. It's like very mundane tasks might be too much. They might verbally say or insinuate that they would like to kill themselves, or they talk about death. They withdraw from friends, family, and typical social situations. They can show impulsive or reckless behavior, being aggressive, or having dramatic shifts in mood, sleeping, eating, or an eating pattern. So there's something more to it than just being sad. So if we, and of course, being in psychosis or these situations where you really can see that there's a mental health crisis. So as a youth worker, I'm not a psychologist. I'm not going to deal with bipolar disease. I can support them, but I'm not going to be the person treating it. The same with sexual abuse, the same in many situations. I would need professional help. But how do I deal with it the first time I meet it? This is kind of the idea behind how we think about youth work. So how do we respond? Okay, the main thing in this situation is to de-escalate the crisis. And you do this by keeping your voice calm. You listen to the person that you talk to. You move slowly, no sudden movements, no doors banging. You try to just make sure that the physical environment is calming in itself. And also you don't make any judgmental comments, like, are you crazy? What are you doing? Stop that. You just try to de-escalate. Try not to escalate or make them angry. Your main job is to de-escalate the situation. And it's important that you know where to go for help. Where are the institutions around you that could support you in this situation? Colleagues, paramedics, hospitals, mental health crisis centers, hotlines. This is something you need to prepare for, and this is why we do the risk assessment and response. We have some kind of plan with what to do. You should identify family members or friends that could help deal with the situation, maybe know the person better, knows the history. If you involve paramedics or mental health personnel, you give them the story about if they have any story with drugs, alcohol, abuse, for instance, or suicide attempts. You share those because that could be important information. You can think about what has helped this young person in the past. They're always acting a lot out if they're among friends. But if we take them alone in a small, safe space, maybe they can calm down a little bit, making sure that yourself is safe all the time also. And also, you have to remove weapons, prediction, unprescribed medication, things that they could use to harm themselves or others. So you remove that from the environment. But you don't handle this situation alone. If you know somebody who's struggling or experiencing a thought about self-harm, you do contact professionals, but you need to know when the shit hits the fan. You need to know where to go. You need to know what to do. So we make this warning and response sheets for different situations, and we'll share all of them with you. So we have warning signs of suicide, and also youth-specific warning signs of suicide. So as I told you earlier, for instance, if young people are experiencing bullying and you see a lot of other symptoms also, you know that that's high in the risk for this to happen. If they have experienced abuse in any kind of way, that would also increase the risk of them committing suicide. We also know that if you're uncertain or questioning about your own sexual orientation, that's something that will raise the risk. So you'll see that there are some more specific things for young people also to look for in addition to emotional markers or verbal markers. So how do you respond? Well, if you think somebody's going to kill themselves, ask them, are you thinking about killing yourself? If they answer yes or maybe, probably they've never been asked that question before. What are you most comfortable doing? And then you ask them, like, we have to deal with this situation. Should we contact a crisis hotline? Should we find a meeting with a counselor? Do we need to go to the hospital or an institution right now? So you identify how you can support this person further in the system. And if a person is thinking or this talking about suicide, it's also important to ask them if they have a plan. Do you have a plan? If they have a plan, they've reached a point where maybe they have started to gather medication or find equipment that could help them end their life. That means that the thought process has gone quite far and you need to seek immediate help. So are you thinking about killing yourself? Do you have a plan? So this is kind of the immediate response, the response you have in the moment. And you see we have warning signs for sexual abuse, violent drugs, and we have responses. For instance, the first thing I should have said to this young girl is basically, I'm very, very sorry that this happened to you. It's not your fault. I will try to support you. You know, that would be now when it happened again, it had happened to me again, and I try to follow these things as good as possible, and I know some of them by heart. So warning signs, response, signs of radicalization, response. We'll share all these with you, and it would be also really interesting to hear from you in the group work. What kind of other situations would these kind of tools be helpful for? So talking about the Swiss Army knife of youth work, it's a good tool to have in most situations. It's really useful. And it can very often be used to fix minor problems, small issues. Very often it is a good tool to fix things while you're getting the right tool. It's sometimes hard with these small things to fix. If you get a real screwdriver, it's a little bit easier. So it's a good tool while you're waiting for somebody else. But it's not a very good tool to use if you're doing advanced brain surgery. Then you need professionals with other kind of tools than you have in a Swiss Army knife. So it's a useful tool, but it's not a specialized tool, which means that we need to know the institutions around us and know how to deal with the people around us. This is how I think about risk and how I deal with risk and risk prevention. I hope it's useful for you. It's some tools that we use quite a lot, and we're very happy to share them with you. And we'll put it probably a link in the chat, or we'll put it in the Drive file that you should have access to. Thank you.